Round two, Warrior Wednesdays. Here we go. Now, if you were just with me, you would know that I gave this like wonderful introduction. And I'm going to do it again because Elizabeth Carr, author, mother, wife, advocate, journalist, writer, and the first IVF baby born in the US is here live. We tried to get her on, but the devil was trying to act up on Instagram this morning. I'm not here for it. I see my friend waving at me, Elizabeth Carr. I can't wait for you to tell the story. All right, let's see if I can get you right. Please let it work because we are not going to give up here. I'm accepting it and I'm adding you again. So I have, oh my God. I
Oh,
was, listen, you have defied all odds in the world. Okay, so I knew that this was going to work. Hi, friend.
hi, how are you? This is real life, okay? Technology sometimes doesn't.
And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. How are you? And welcome to Warrior
So
Wednesdays.
much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I am just so grateful to have your voice inviting me here because of all the work you've done and all of the just exposure and uh, ability to not be afraid to share your story is really inspiring to somebody like me. So thank
Oh,
you.
well, thank you. And thank you, first of all, for being like a fabulous human being, for being a friend of mine, for holding my hand in these fertility streets. What some of you guys might not know, and please put some clapping hands in the comment section because this is like a round of applause here for Elizabeth. What some of you might not know is that we work together often in these fertility streets, as I like to call them, at different conventions and medical conferences where we continue to advocate for everyone's right to build a family and have assistance doing that. And oftentimes Elizabeth is right there holding my hand when I have a microphone. And one of the things I want to say before we get into your story is that you're always whispering in my ear, whatever you need me for, I'm here. If somebody wants to have a conversation, if somebody wants to ask a question, if somebody wants to take a picture, I'm right here. And so she has been just not just an incredible person and a friend personally, but she has also just made herself so openly available to the community. So I want to thank you for that because it's super cool of you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely, my darling. Well, listen, let's get in. I know the story. For those that don't know the story, there's a great documentary called Test Tube Babies, A Daughter for Judy, that was on PBS, the Nova documentaries. Although Test Tube Baby was a little bit not the term that should have been
Yeah,
used, but can we get into it? Can we talk about the beginnings? Let's talk about the HERstory part of it first, and then we're going to like dive into the personal stuff.
sure.
So can you give us a little bit of the story of mom and dad and how you came to be?
Sure, absolutely. So my parents were married, basically right when my parents were in college. They were super young and healthy. And my father was the oldest of four siblings. My mother was the middle child of three. And they always knew they wanted a family, potentially a big family, because that's what they were used to. And then they very quickly started having problems. My mother had three ectopic pregnancies in a row, three of them. Yeah.
Three. And for those that don't know, an ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy that happens in the fallopian tubes. And that's a deadly pregnancy if it's not treated and cared for. So your mom had three.
Three.
Okay.
So by the third one, her internal bleeding was so terrifyingly bad that her OBGYN said, we need to remove your fallopian tubes. Um, they came to find out that the cause of her issues was scar tissue from a botched appendix surgery. And
Wow.
that was impacting that whole area, essentially. So they removed the fallopian tubes. And with that surgery, my mother's OBGYN said, well, you know that you now probably will never have a child of your own.
Mhm. I mean, who, yeah, right. And your mom was 28 years old at this
She
point.
had me when she was 28. She was a
Oh,
little when she had her surgery. Yeah.
okay, so she was a little younger than that. So we're still even figuring out like who we are as
Yeah.
people, and we have this dream and this want in our life, and then somebody tells you, oh, the parts that you need
Yeah.
in order to make this dream come true, we've had to remove. And so now you may no longer be a baby. And IVF was not a prevalent known thing at the time, you guys. That was not like something, well, okay, let me raise my hand for that. So go into that, because it wasn't existent. We didn't have it.
No. So for those who may not know, another dear friend of mine is who was the first IVF baby in the world. She was born in 1978. And so the interesting story about how this all came about is on the very day that she was born, my doctors, or my parents' doctors, really, the doctors Jones, had just moved to Norfolk, Virginia to be very close to their dear friend, Dr. Mason Andrews, who was at Norfolk General Hospital and was also the mayor of Norfolk. And so a reporter, knowing that these doctors had a history in reproduction and studying hormones and things like that, knocked on the door and said, well, we want to talk about what you think about the first IVF baby in the world being born. And what would that take to have a program here in Norfolk? And my doctor, Dr. Jones, who, if anybody has ever heard a piece of media with him or anything like that, he had this booming voice, and he often told me later in life that, you know, he thought that was a flip kind of question. And so he kind of gave a flip answer, which was like, well, the only thing it would take is money. The very next day, Woo. Their phone rings, and a former patient of Dr. Georgiana, who was Howard's wife and the endocrinologist, said, I read the story that said all it's going to take is some money for here in Norfolk. How much do you need? And she wrote a check. And that's how the program really got its start.
That's how the program, so you guys got that. So Dr. Howard Jones, right, is the OBGYN.
He was,
and his,
yeah, he was a surgeon.
He was a surgeon, and his wife was an endocrinologist.
Yep.
He got a question, gave a flippant answer. Well, we'll just take some money, and then boom, here comes the check. So now the program, which was experimental at the time, right?
Yeah.
To about assisted reproduction, begins in Norfolk, Virginia. Now he's got the money, so now he's going to create the thing. So tell us a little bit about the different couples at the time that were invited into the program, including mom and dad.
So what you have to remember, and many people don't realize this,
Mm-hmm.
My family is from Massachusetts. IVF was illegal in Massachusetts at the time.
Say it again. IVF.
Now we're one of the best reproductive states, but IVF was illegal in Massachusetts at the time. So my parents had to apply. Her OBGYN wrote her a letter of recommendation to go take part in this experimental program in Virginia. And they were accepted into the program because, other than the fact that she didn't have fallopian tubes, she was young and healthy, and, you know, they could prove she could get pregnant. She just couldn't stay pregnant.
Right.
And male factor infertility was not an issue with my father. So they were kind of the prime candidates. But there were also about 10 other couples in the program who had also applied, because this was the first program in the United States. Louise Brown was born via natural cycle, which meant there weren't any hormone protocols involved, right? It was just, let's keep pumping sperm and see if it takes. And so in the United States, they had latched onto this idea of, if we can stimulate the production of eggs, then we can kind of better control this whole process, because we can get the timing a little bit better, and then we'll have a little bit more knowledge of like what happens when and how to, you know, better the process. So everybody in the program was on a different protocol, and so nobody in my parents' group could really talk to each other. They were all kind of rooting for each other, but also kind of wanted to be the ones that like hit the jackpot, right? So they didn't know until my mother got pregnant that they were going to be the first in the US.
Okay, so all right, so first of all, it's super cool because everybody had to be kind of hush hush, right? This is experimental. And you guys, so mom and dad are in Massachusetts, but they have to go to Norfolk to do all of this because that's where the program is. And because there was different protocols that were being tested, was mom the first female that was given egg stimulating hormonal medication?
Yeah, she was one of the first in the world to be put on this drug that is no longer produced called Pergonal. And so they were, now remember, this was all not outpatient like it is now, where you're self-injecting hormones. My mother was going down on a plane for blood draws. Somebody else was giving her the shots. It was not my dad or her injecting, right? This was all done by a hospital program. So it was not chump change to fly down and back all the
No,
time.
no. And they were, I'm shifting and moving around. Sorry, you guys. And they were so brave. And again, like so young, because when I was in my early 20s, y'all, I was running around New York City partying, going to see Broadway shows, drinking a little drink. There's no way that I would have been traveling to Norfolk, Virginia, doing an experimental treatment and not knowing whether or not this was going to work. So we have a debt that we owe mom and dad as a society because you guys, I did IVF. You know, when you freeze your eggs, it's the first stages of that. And I took the injections. My mother gave me the injections to stimulate my ovaries to get as many eggs out. And so your mom was one of the first in the world to ever do that. Pretty cool. Okay, so then they go through the process. Now I've watched the documentary. And for those who have not watched it, it's really cool. And I do want you to tell the story we talked about yesterday, a little bit later, like when you first saw it and then the class thing. But I watched the documentary, and what was so amazing also with what mom and dad were doing is that they were being filmed.
Yes.
They, their most sacred hope and wish and prayer and dream was also on cameras, and it was definitely not guaranteed to work. So they were being filmed even through the extraction, the taking of the egg. So tell us a little bit then about the process and how the petri dish and how it all came to be.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's interesting is that the film crew, yeah, they were in the delivery room. Like,
Yeah.
people don't realize, like, it was a packed house. I was a C-section because they weren't sure. First of all, ultrasound was terrible, so they couldn't really see, if I was going to be healthy or not. And I was very little. I was only 5 pounds, 12 ounces, which is not a shocker because if you know me in real life, I'm only 5 feet tall. So like, but back then they were really worried that I wasn't going to be healthy.
Right.
So there was a lot of security around kind of protecting my parents. She had armed guards outside of her hospital wing, like a whole wing of the hospital was blocked off because it was very controversial and very scary. There were things like that. But they, from the get-go, had the option from the Jones to stay private or go public. And my parents felt very strongly that they needed to tell their story so that other people would know that this was an option that was available. And so any lack of privacy that we had, we felt like it was worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really, truly was. It really, because look at us here today and the amazing transparency that they had. I remember there's a part in the documentary. So what's so cool about it, you guys, is you literally see the petri dish. You literally see them putting the semen in. They weren't washing sperm back then. They weren't doing the things that we know about now. And this was, and the implantation and your mom's beautiful pregnancy. And you are able to view Elizabeth's birth, and which is a wonderful thing. But I remember one of the, I guess, producers of this documentary at the time asking your mom, do you think that this is going to put a lot of pressure on Elizabeth? And she said, no, you know, she's going to be our Elizabeth, our Elizabeth. So our Elizabeth is also part of the world's HERstory. So now that this beautiful birth has happened and everything seems to be good and clear, right? And you're growing and you're becoming who you are. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of learning about your actual conception? How did they tell you? And I think, Elizabeth, what is so great about this is that this is something we don't talk about in 2023. We don't have this conversation about, you know, there's now, gratefully, right? There's hundreds of thousands of babies and families that are helped through assisted reproduction. But we don't really have the conversation of, well, what do you tell the baby?
Right.
They didn't ask for this. They didn't ask to be a part of this process. So there's moral questions about that, right? There's religious questions about that. But how did your parents handle that information with you? And when did you learn?
Yeah, so that's like the number one question when people approach me now that are going through the IVF process. They want to know, how do I tell my child? Or how do I tell them they're donor conceived, or whatever the case may be. So with me, I joke that I feel like I've always known, because my first press conference was at 3 days old. Like, who says that? That's right? But when I was little, and you know, children start asking the questions of where do babies come from, right? Like the normal, natural questions. My parents had a very natural progression for that answer, which was, well, mommy and daddy couldn't have you without the help of some very special doctors and a lot of science. And up to a certain age, that suffices, right, as the answer. But when I was about 6 or 7, we, every year after the Jones program really started to take off, had what we called reunions. They were on Mother's Day. And all of the families and babies that had been born would come back together and just, you know, celebrate that we're all here. And so the first year, or the second year, I guess, they screened the Nova documentary of my birth. And I watched it with one doctor on this side and one doctor on this side. And as I'm watching myself being born, which is really bizarre to do, I've got 2 doctors explaining in 6-year-old terms what the heck is happening.
Wow.
And so at age 6, I learned the sentence I've been saying my entire life, which is, the sperm and the egg came together in a petri dish and were fertilized. And once it was fertilized, it went back in the mother's womb. And 9 months later, here I am, like everybody else. That's the sentence. That was the big takeaway from watching how I was born.
And you were how old at that time?
About 6 or 7.
And I think what's so beautiful about that is that you accepted it. And it was your truth. And like you said, it's something that you've been saying ever since. And so when we look at these conversations now, and in our politics, and like I said, in our communities, in our world, it's so amazing how resilient children are, that as long as they're told the truth, you know what I mean, with compassion in a way that they can understand it, they receive it, and they're able to just continue on with it. And because what I loved about what you just said is, just like everybody else. That's how you ended it. Just like I was sperm, egg in the petri dish, and then it was put back in mommy's womb, and now I'm here just like everybody else. And that to me is really the landing thing here. Now, can you talk a little bit about, so you're a child when you first hear that, and then you go to school.
So I, you know, learned about reproduction and the sexual organs and everything at an exceptionally young age. We always used all the correct terminology in my household. That was a big thing. You know, we didn't have any pet names for body parts or anything like that. And so I remember distinctly being 10, and they were going to have the birds and the bees talk, right? So the boys went across the hall and the girls stayed in one classroom, and up comes this film of how babies are made, and everybody's sitting there in silence, kind of like, oh my God. And the school nurse was in charge of this, and I'll never forget, the film ended and she kind of looked around the room and said, now, are there any questions? And not a single hand went up except for mine. And I said, that is not at all how I got here.
She's 10, you guys. She's 10.
And I explained to the entire class and my teachers, no, this is how I got here. Because I felt like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I'm being left out. Like, this is not how I got here. So I'm going to tell you how I got here, because there's other kids I know that got here the same way I did.
Right.
And granted, a letter went home the next day that we're very sorry that this was not a part of the approved curriculum, kind of thing. And I got a kind of a slap on the wrist. But I've always had that thing in me that I've never been afraid to talk about it. I don't think there's a reason anyone should be hush hush or have a stigma. I think the more people talk about it, just like my parents thought from day one, the more people know their options, which is so incredibly important. I want people to know what their options are before they even need them.
Yes. Now, and I want to be clear, because you're obviously, you were born into a historical moment. You are American history, but at the same time, it's very rare for you to own your story with such vigor, even at age 10, and to not be left out of the conversation. So I just want to applaud you for that, because clearly you were baking you said your parents wanted people to know about this. So you were baking in an oven of truth. They never kept it a secret, which was so selfless of them. Yeah. Right. And because of that, the energy that you were even coming to be in was out loud and proud about how you got here. But I want to talk a little bit about your teenage years and a little bit about the pressure, and if you have anything that you can share with us about the things that are not so cool about having this title, that are not, I was saying earlier when we got cut off and I had to come back on, that some of the reason that I take a break from doing this is because sometimes it hurts. Sometimes I'm just, it sucks and it makes me mad. And so here you are with an extremely unique life that nobody else can relate to in the US. As well, they can, but you're one, right? Because you guys, what you don't know is they actually name the babies by the number, right? So I want to know, what is it about this scenario that ain't so cute about being the first IVF baby born in the US? What sucks?
Yeah, I mean, how much time do we have? No, I'm just no, listen, I am exceptionally grateful to be here.
Of course.
And I have now, in my later years, embraced, fully that I have this unique position that I can actually help change the perception around reproductive technologies, help get insurance coverage, all of these things, right? That's why I'm an advocate, and that's why I work at Genomic Prediction today, because we're driving and moving the needle forward, right? But the things that weren't cute were, my family did get the death threats. My family did have constant media attention. I mean, anytime there was an advance, and in the first 10 years of my life, that was the wild west of the infertility field. And that's when things were rapidly changing, right? I remember going on a tour of the first facility that ever froze eggs. Okay. I was a teen when that happened. Remember when they were debating ICSI, which is, pretty standard now. I remember the first time PGTM was ever performed. So there were all of these kind of historical moments that I was really the context for which to measure everything else. So anytime there was something that happened, they were like, let's haul out that Elizabeth Carr lady and see what they think about it, right? Which, you know, when you're an awkward teen, I don't want cameras following me to my homecoming dance, but guess what? They did. I didn't have a choice about it.
Wow.
Right? I just want to go on a date. I don't want it filmed.
Right. But everybody would have wanted to see what the baby was doing now, kind of thing.
Normal, right? Yeah. That was the thing. Like, everybody always asked, and people don't know, I had barrages of tests up until I was a late teen, where they were measuring my brain waves. They were measuring all of my internal system. Like, they really didn't have a clear understanding of, is IVF going to have a long-term impact on this person's health? That was really, truly unknown. Now, spoiler, nope.
Yeah, spoiler, the answer is nope. Right,
like
right.
Everybody else, literally. But that was a lot of pressure. And so anytime people wanted to talk to me or interview me, I was very aware. I should not say and ah. I need to be articulate. I need to be polite.
Wow.
I am perceived as I made up the term, spokes baby, because that's what I was.
Wow. Regina Townsend is here from the Broken Brown Egg, and she said that's an extreme amount of pressure. You know Regina, right?
Yes.
We love her. And it is an extreme amount of pressure. So how does the family deal with that? And was there ever I don't want to do this anymore? Is there, I want to know, was there like a rule book you had to play by? Was this something that was, you know, talked about and agreed to when they went into this trial? Or was there ever something where you could just be like, I tap out, like, fine, get somebody else to do it?
Yeah.
As we say in these memes. What was the protocol?
So when I was little, you know, obviously it was pretty much up to my parents, because I was a minor. And I don't fault them for going on these. We never did the Oprahs or the Phil Donahues, and Lord knows we were asked, but they said no, because they didn't want their, you know, 4-year-old in front of a live studio audience being subjected to crazy questions they couldn't screen. So they only did things that were considered educational. But when I became, you know, essentially 16 is really when my parents were like, it's up to you. Now, if you don't want to do this, fine. And so in college, I kind of was like, I'm just going to retreat into being a journalist, because if I am writing the story, I can't be the story. That's a conflict of interest in the field. So I just kind of hid away, because it wasn't always fun. I talk about in my book an incident where my college roommate and I were at Star Market. We were buying like mac and cheese because we didn't want to eat at the dining hall. And in the checkout line, she's flipping through one of the tabloids, and there I am next to a chart comparing Louise and I. And my college roommate was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And I was like, this is not cool. First of all, I was not asked for this interview. I was never consulted. None of it's true. And my roommate was like, I want you to sign this. And I was like, I can't believe you're going to buy this. Like, this is not at all who I am or okay. And she bought it anyway. And I never signed it for her. And it was really upsetting that somebody that I knew and like lived with was going to believe a tabloid.
Wow.
And that's the stuff that's like not fun.
Right. Right. You know, and well, first of all, let me just like put my arms around you, give you like a little hug for that, because if I was your friend back then, I probably would have taken her to the corner and been like, yo.
Right.
Because that's how I am. But somebody here wrote something really amazing. Oh, it's Regina Townsend, of course, again, that says, I have to remind myself that my son is not my infertility story. Judah is Judah. That is correct. So that's amazing. Tell us also about, there was a story that you told me where a friend was upset that you did not reveal to them that you are American history. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so again, in college, I don't remember how it came up, but I was in some other publication, and I'll never forget, I walked into class and my friend was like, "You never told me that that's who you were."
Wow.
And I was like, "When was the last time that you introduced yourself and were like, oh, by the way, I was a natural
Right.
birth?" It like, it is not something you lead off sentences with. It either happens organically or it doesn't, but I'm not going to go out of my way and introduce myself every time I meet somebody. "Hi, I'm Elizabeth Carr. I was the first IVF baby in the United States." That's not my whole being. It's a
Right.
part of it. Right. So it's always interesting when people say that. Like, I don't have any shame about it. It's just, it's not going to be the first sentence necessarily out of my mouth.
And neither is mine going to be, "Hi, nice to meet you. I froze my eggs because I don't got a man yet." That ain't gonna be that either. But I think one of the things that really helps us continue to remind ourselves of is how we protect our peace.
Yeah.
And that not everybody is required or sufficient to know your story. Whether you have a famous story that's in this fertility space, or whether you have a singular story of your own that's in this space, it is not for everybody to know. And we have to find very unique ways to protect our peace, So kudos to you for doing that. And okay, so now we've gone through the college years. Your parents have given you the option at 16 and all of that. If you want to be a part of this, be a part of this. If not, you don't. But now let's go a little bit into the adult years. I want to hear about how you decided to work in the fertility space after being the first IVF baby born in the US. But I also want to get into your first pregnancy,
Yep.
and how the history of you was impacted by that, because they were also watching everything that your body did. So let's talk about your pregnancy first, because I'm really interested in that.
Yeah. So again, I'll reiterate, people didn't know the long-term effects of being an IVF baby, even though Louise Brown's sister had a baby by then. She was also an IVF baby and had a totally, non-eventful pregnancy. When I got pregnant with my son, and by the way, I was young as well. I was 28 when I had my son, because I had it pounded into me at fertility conferences: have your children young, and all this stuff. We didn't have all the tools we have now. And I was a journalist at the time, and I was getting constant phone calls from people when they heard rumblings of like, I'm pregnant, even at like two months. And
so the people that were calling were fertility specialists?
Fertility specialists, and also journalists who like keep a very close eye on the goings on in the fertility world. And they had heard,
okay,
as
so they were like, Elizabeth Carr is pregnant. Okay. So right.
Rumor, she's pregnant. Let's confirm the rumor. And I don't know how, but I managed to graciously ask my colleagues in the journalism field, I would prefer if you not write about my pregnancy until I give birth. And that wasn't because I was worried about the pregnancy. I was having a completely non-eventful, normal, no big whoop pregnancy. I didn't even have morning sickness. Which, knock on wood, that's why I can never have another child. My first pregnancy was too easy. But my mother and my father had a huge source of anxiety. Ooh. When I was pregnant, when I told them I was pregnant, it was kind of like, oh, okay. And they couldn't allow themselves to be happy because they had lost so many babies before me, that they had gone through the same excitement of, oh my gosh, we're pregnant, but she could never stay pregnant. Mm-hmm. And so I asked my colleagues in the field, please don't write about my pregnancy until I've given birth. And at that point, I got real smart. And I said, and by the way, because I knew how the media field worked, I'm doing one radio interview, I'm doing one television, and I'm writing my own story. And it ran on the front page of the Boston Globe where I was working. because I said, I am now an adult. I am not allowing anybody else to tell this story other than me.
Okay, two things. First of all, I just I want to honor the fact that your parents, having gone through multiple losses before being part of the trial that created the beautiful Elizabeth Carr that we're talking to today, that knowing that their child was pregnant brought all of those memories, all of that anxiety, all of that grief,
yes,
right back to the
and to
surface,
the point,
which
my parents' doctors were like, tell me where you're planning on delivering. Do they have a level 3 NICU in case there's an emergency? I mean, that's where everybody's head were.
you know, it's so amazing because when people are going through things, your mom's Judy, right?
Yep.
So the grief and the loss happened to your parents. It happened to them. And to have to relive it in the fear that it may happen to their own child, their miracle baby,
yeah,
has to be a lot. And also pressure on you in a sense of you just want to just be the pregnant girl,
yep,
without it having to reiterate the sad stories of the past. So I really just extend a hand of grace to your family and to you, because we as the general public, we don't know these intricate parts
yep,
of your story because we read the article and we watch the documentary, but we don't know how terrifying that must have been when it's supposed to be the happiest time and the most exciting time of your life.
yes.
But they know pregnancy differently than we do, right? And then I want to just honor the fact that you wrote your own story. And again, it goes back to that 10-year-old little girl that was like, that's not how I got here. Like,
I wanted to send a photographer into my hospital room, like right after I gave birth to him, to get a picture for the newspaper. And I was like, under no circumstances are we doing that. And my husband actually took the photo.
wow.
And my own editor. And I was like, I'm not allowing anyone else in here. This is not for them. This is for me. I'm not doing that.
Do you understand how emotionally and mentally healthy that is? I just hope everybody on this live takes from this how much you have taken control of your life when the world thought that they could write your story. Let me just tell you right now that given the pressures that you were born under, which were of no choosing of your own, you have truly, from the youngest of ages, decided how your story would be told and taken it into your own hands. And
yeah,
I just commend you for that, and let that be a lesson to all of us wherever we are on our journey, whether it's fertility, whether it's career, whether it's whatever, to take control of your story in your own hands. So thank you, because it didn't have to turn out that way. And you have incredible parents, and an incredible self-awareness of how to protect yourself. And obviously you've chosen very well with your husband as well, to protect you as well. So tell us how you got into the marketing field that you're in at the genetic testing lab and staying in this fertility community, because I've said this to you personally. I'd be like, girl, sometimes I just be like, I'm done with it. Like, I just want to
yeah.
See, this is where you guys get to hear what we really talk about.
Yeah.
Sometimes I want to just be like, I just want to get out, because once you tell your story, everybody wants a piece of you. And it's beautiful in the beginning, but then it becomes like, but you decided to like go into it.
Yeah.
So what was that decision-making process, and how did your advocacy come to be?
So when as I told you, I kind of retreated from this all when I was in college. And while I was in college, I was studying to be a journalist, which I was very blessed to be, and very successful. But I was writing about health and wellness, which is probably not a shocker to anyone listening to this.
No.
And so on the side, I've always had this advocacy, as we have heard. So because I was a writer, I was doing a lot of ghostwriting on the side for clinics. And nobody knew it was me writing it, because I had this unique set of skills where I could translate highly technical things into English for people who don't know anything about this field or anything about the science. And it kind of dawned on me like, all right, I have a very particular set of skills. And I felt like I had just reached this point where I wanted to be able to give back. I wanted to be able to say thank you to an entire industry, right? Without these incredible scientists and doctors, I would 100% not be here, because my parents wouldn't even know IVF was available. And it wouldn't have been here in the United States. So I started slowly kind of getting back into writing for.
Oh, wait a minute. I gotta pause because because I heard it differently when you said, I wanted a way to say thank you to this entire medical community, but without these doctors, I wouldn't be here and IVF wouldn't be in the United States.
Yeah.
Did you guys hear that part?
Yeah.
IVF, without these incredible doctors and without the participation of the families, including your mom and dad, not only would you not be here and the world would be so less bright, but IVF would not be in the United States without this woman that is right here on this live. So with all of myself, I just I owe you a debt of gratitude that as a citizen of the United States, your contribution and your family's contribution makes it possible for all of us here in this country to have this assisted reproduction available to us as we find ways to get it covered by insurance, as we find ways to get grants to people that need it and all of those things. But the fact that it exists in this country, your family is a major part of. So thank you. Everybody just give her a thank you for that. Because when you said that in the United States, I went, wait, as long as I've known you, I've never heard it put that way. Yeah. So thank you for that. Thank you for that.
It's true, right? Like if I had not turned out normal, quote unquote.
Woo, and Elizabeth.
Very aware of that as a young kid. But that's why I have decided, I had decided in my post-college years, essentially, to really just dive headfirst. And I didn't want just people to know their options. I really wanted to be able to.
There's a bunch of thank yous coming to you. I just want you to see them. The warrior community is lit, honey. We put the comments down, okay? So there's a bunch of thank yous, and I just want you to see them. Yes.
So I really wanted to help move the industry and move the needle. And I was very aware that the way I got here, doctors didn't just sit on their laurels and say, okay, we figured it out, we're good to roll. They kept pushing the field forward. That's why where I am now at Genomic Prediction, which produces the LifeView genetic testing, they don't just produce one of the best tests for pre-implantation genetic testing. They are constantly innovating and researching and studying and bettering the field. It was a very conscious decision on my part to say, I am aligning with you all because you're really helping the field move forward, which is what I want to do. In all of my advocacy work, I want to move us forward. I want to finally get that insurance mandate in Virginia where I was born, and it still isn't there. And I keep testifying, and we're going to make it happen somehow, some way. It's the same way with bettering these technologies, bettering the outcomes, bettering the pregnancy rates, lessening your time to pregnancy. All of these things are so incredibly important. If my parents had had some of the tools that are available now, I can't even imagine how much less heartache they could have gone through, right? Like, it's not lost on me at all. And
what and first of all, again, a huge thank you, because this is what I was saying, you guys, is she's an incredible individual from the beginnings of her life, but is still fighting for the patients in this space. And I just, what are some of the tips that you want to leave us with, having working in the genetic testing field? What are the things that you want people to know? Because we often talk about empowering ourselves and sometimes not knowing the questions to ask. So with all of your wealth of knowledge, and hi, Terrence, just really quickly, Elizabeth, Terrence, you need to say hi to this amazing woman. She's the first IVF baby born in the US, but Terrence and I are on a new show, you guys. This is like a shameless plug coming out tomorrow called Obliterated on Netflix. Okay, there you heard it. there you heard it. Okay, so we put Hollywood in here. But okay, now back to genetics and fertility and all the things that we do. So with your wealth of knowledge and expertise on all of the things, what are some of the things that the patients that are in the space, what tips can you give them about asking questions, what type of questions to ask, and how to empower themselves?
Yeah, sure. So again, we finally learned after 41 years, like how to find a fertility clinic that fits for you, right? Like we've written countless articles about that. So we've kind of got that down. But now the new frontier is really the pre-implantation genetic testing. And so what does that look like? What are the questions? How do you know that a pre-implantation genetic testing lab is the best that you could use or is the right fit for you? So, one of the things that we have finally come to talk about in the space as a whole is, not every fertility clinic is going to be the right fit for you, right? And so you should really feel empowered to ask the questions, and it's not against them, it's to empower yourself. And so it can often be easy to just kind of go with the first genetic testing lab that your clinic recommends. But we all know not all technology and not all platforms are created equal. There are, tests out there that some are better than others, right? And so my tips for people to figure out how you can find the best platform is, don't be afraid to ask your clinician, like, well, why do you use that platform? And if they say, well, we've used them for XYZ years, maybe take a beat and say, okay, but why did you choose them all those years ago? And has their technology kept up with the newest, latest, greatest, most innovative, best platform? What are their pregnancy rates with this pre-implantation genetic testing? What's the resolution even? Like, this is technology. Like, are we talking they're looking through a telescope you bought at the department store, or are we looking through the Hubble? Like, that's the kind of difference.
Okay, that's the difference in the technology itself. Okay.
Like, how many data points are they looking at? Are they looking at 100, or are they looking at over 1.6 million or 20 million or 800,000? Like, what's the resolution that they're looking at? Because it's really the difference between looking at, a TV with bunny rabbit ears or 4K high def.
Do you guys understand that? So, I mean, I just want to make sure that everybody really, really understands the intricacies of all of this, because we do often just go with whoever recommends, your clinic says, go to this place because that's who they've worked with for X amount of years, without even checking to see, are they up on the technology? So you guys I really hope that you understand. She's saying it's the difference between those bunny ear TVs for those that are way younger than me and Elizabeth that may be on here. First of all, you're cute. Second of all, there wasn't always flat screens. There was tubes with antennas and static. And that's what she's talking from. The difference from that to HD, basically, in terms of the technology. Okay, so we need to find out the resolutions, all of those, the platforms that are used.
And then also, are they driving the industry? Are they constantly validating their own testing and continuing to research and publish? Because as the technology evolves, one of the things I have had a front seat to in this industry has been watching the industry itself evaluate, okay, let me give an example to make this real simple. I remember when we were putting 4, 5, 6, 8 embryos back for transfer.
Yes.
Opposed to singles, right? Singletons.
Yep.
Singletons have become the standard, but only because the industry tried it the other way and realized this is actually not going to get us the best outcomes, and it's very dangerous to the health of the mother. But
correct.
Only because of self-reflection and studying and looking at it. It's the same way with pre-implantation genetic testing. We're constantly, especially at Genomic Prediction, we voraciously publish studies and validations, and other people have validated externally the things we're doing because it's continuing to drive the needle and innovate. If you are content with just watching your bunny rabbit ear television, why would you be content with that?
Right.
When there's better out there, why would you ever be content with that? Especially when you think about how much time and effort and money IVF takes. Why wouldn't you want the best tests out there?
And the emotional toll that it takes. And to your point, this was something that was not available to your mom and dad.
No.
Having these questions weren't even in there. First of all, the technology wasn't there, but also just knowing what to ask. So you giving us these tips is very, very important. Now, do you recommend people that are going through the IVF process, or is it a personal decision to get genetic testing?
Yeah, so
prior to the implantation.
That's where it's critically important that you talk with your clinician, but also when you're looking at who you're thinking about doing your genetic testing through, do they have genetic counselors on hand? Because I'm not the right person to answer that question. Our genetic counselors are the right people to answer that question.
Wait a minute, I didn't even know genetic counselors came with the program. See?
That's a key critical difference, right? These people are trained specifically to help you unpack your either family history, or if you're using donor egg or sperm or any of those things. They're trained to help you figure out what your best options could be for testing based on everything you know and everything you don't know. And so those are the people you should be looking to and asking the questions of, because that's a whole field that specializes just in that particular thing.
Wow.
And many people don't know about that. Our genetic counselors are critically important. Important. So if you, for example, for you froze a bunch of eggs.
Yep.
How are you going to pick which ones to use?
Well, I'm calling you, but yes, that's a good,
So what my point is, when I was born, it was a beauty contest. There were 2 embryos that they retrieved. I'm one of them. Okay. And the way they picked which one was, this one was the most round looking.
I saw that. Did you guys hear that? So she said for her, it was a beauty contest. Which was the more round embryo that they're going to fertilize and then implant, versus a whole slew of genetic testings to really find out what's the healthiest embryo that we could have to have a live birth.
Are there the normal amount of chromosomes? Are there, health risks that you could reduce potentially looking at a particular embryo over another? Is there a specific sex that has a lower risk of a disease? Things like that. That's where, if you need to speak to a genetic counselor, and the pre-implantation genetic testing company should have those people on hand for you to ask those questions of, because they are hands down the best people to talk to about this. Because a lot of clinicians, study genetics, and so they might know a lot, but they don't know the intricacies of all of the genes and how they interact with each other and things like that. So
two questions I have for you, and I don't know if you have the answers to this or not, but one, what's the average cost for genetic testing? I want to know if you know that. And 2, I'm assuming that this goes along with, you might know Allie LaForce. She who's an advocate as well, And Allie has an organization because of Huntington's disease that is prevalent in her husband's family. I believe his mother unfortunately passed away from Huntington's disease. So though they were not infertile, they opted for IVF, you guys, in order to eradicate Huntington's disease from their family. So this way they use genetic testing as a way to see if there was a link, and to not put that embryo in, and to put an embryo hopefully that did not carry the disease, and they are the parents of a beautiful boy. So is that something that people can look into if their family does have you know, a disease link? And also, what's the average cost?
Yeah, so it's important to note Genomic Prediction, which does LifeView testing. We have a partnership with HERstory, which is Allie's station.
Yay.
And that's very important that people can look at that gene line, because it's a terrible disease.
Yes.
But the other thing to note is that across the board, different testing platforms cost different things. It's just like IVF. There's not like one single price, right? It depends on how the genetic testing company set up the fees, whether a patient is paying, whether insurance is paying, whether the clinic is paying and the patient's paying the clinic, how many embryos, what tests. So it's across the board.
Okay.
In terms of cost. But I will say, I remember the early days of genetic testing, and the cost has come way, way down from where it began. And the goal is that, you know, we want to make it attainable for people to get this testing, because it is important. And like I said, if you have 5 embryos,
right,
how do you pick?
How do you pick?
Your doctor pick what might have the best potential outcome or has the lowest disease risk? That's the purpose of some of these tests, especially here at Genomic Prediction at LifeView. We help you get the right information to triage and prioritize those things. And then what you do with the information is your call. But at least you have information, right? Like at least when you get this report back, you can pick up the phone and talk to our genetic counselor and say, okay, give this to me in plain English. I don't know what any of this means.
Right. Because
that's where the advocacy comes in. That's where my like little niche of explain this in English to people who don't know how I was born when I was 10. That's what genetic counselors do. That's the piece that's so important. You need to be able to understand the report that you're getting back.
You guys, I just love her. I first of all, thank you, because I learned a lot about genetic testing in this. And Regina is here, and she was saying that this is another area where access is a conversation, because she gets messages from Black couples who are concerned about sickle cell. I'm going to be working with the sickle cell organization soon. So yes, this is where we need the access, and this is where we need the information. So but as we bring this whole thing to a close, and I mean, it's never a close for you and me, because, you know, I'm going to be talking to you, but I want to say thank you. I learned so much about genetic testing in this conversation, so much about your life in this conversation. And really, guys, what I really wanted to bring, and I hope that we brought this to you, is Elizabeth's groundbreaking story in the US, but also who she is as a person. And I really believe that we've learned so much about you, and how you continue to be a driving force. Something that you said in this conversation: how are we moving the industry forward? We're moving it forward with people like Elizabeth Carr. We're moving it forward with people that are determined and that have a mission to make sure that you are educated and empowered in your journey to building families. And this incredible human being did not have to enter this space and stay in this space. And she has, and the fertility community is better for it. I absolutely love you and adore you. Are there any last words that you have for us before I let you go? Be the wife, mom, journalist, and amazing human that you are for the rest of the day. But I love you.
Yes. Most importantly, if you have any questions at all, especially about genetic testing, because I said it's the Wild West and people don't really understand it, you can follow us on LifeView_PGT. But also, for me personally, reach out to me. I'm constantly answering people's questions. You have my Instagram. It's eJordan12. I am an open book. I told you, Kellee, like you asked me yesterday, anything off limits, and I said nope, because that's like there is no question that is silly or stupid or out of bounds. It is critically important that if you have a question, somebody else has the question, right? Yeah. That's the whole point of like journalism, is if somebody has a question, somebody else has that question. So it's better off to ask it and get an answer so that you know, so you can share that information and knowledge. And so I'm always happy to talk to anybody, have anybody reach out. But if you want resources too, like if you say that's what I'm really good at. Like, that's why I was a journalist, right? Like, I go find information for people. So nothing is off bounds, out of limits. And I just want to say thank you so much for doing this again, because just as I said, people need to know their options before they need them. And this is another way to keep moving that needle forward and have these conversations happen. Because I truly think at some point, you know, we have so many babies that are IVF babies now in the US and across the globe. I think eventually it will be even less of a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? It will be just totally, I thought when I was little, everybody was going to have IVF baby. And I think that we could eventually get to that point. I really do. And I think that that's beautiful and wonderful. There's nothing to be ashamed of.
Ever. And you are a huge part of making it less of a big deal. From that little girl when she was 10 years old, raising her hand saying, wait a minute, that's not how I got here. We hope that there are so many 10-year-olds that have that same kind of hand raised and that are proudly saying, I'm here just like everybody else. Just the way that you said it. Thank you for being such a formidable person in this community. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your brilliance. Thank you for the way that you protect your peace and advocate for everybody in the fertility community. I honor you. I adore you. I'm obsessed with you. And the world is a better place because you are in it and because your parents so fearlessly did everything that they could to get you here. So thank you to you and your entire family. I adore you, friend. I'm going to be saving this. I love you. Mwah. I'm going to be saving this, you guys. I'm going to be posting it, and it'll be on the Warrior Wednesdays website, warrior-wednesdays.com. This is our season 2 premiere with the incredible Elizabeth Jordan Carr. And as she said, reach out to her. Get her book, Under the Microscope. You can get it on Amazon. Research her and just love on her the way that we all do, because she is our first treasure. So we love you. Mwah! Thank you for being here, friend. All right, you guys. Thanks so much. See you soon.